There's one issue in America more important than every other. It's our national spending. Welcome to Equal Matters. It's an issue that politically has become difficult to talk about because there's so much money being borrowed on your behalf. In the last year alone, the United States government borrowed $3 trillion on your behalf. It's an unfathomable amount of money, $3 trillion. And it's going to have some massive impacts on you, on your country, coming forward. So today, I want to dive deeper into this issue. First, how does the United States government borrow $3 trillion in just one fiscal year? And what does that all mean for us? Our friend Congressman David Schweikert is joining us again today as we try to uncover not just what the challenges that lie ahead are, what we can actually do about it. Welcome to Equal Matters. David, thank you for being here. The first question is, how does this happen? How is it possible the United States can possibly borrow in 365 days, $3 trillion?
Well, you offer bonds and people are willing to buy it, and we borrow from the trust funds. So, okay, let's first do something technical. And then we're going to talk about what's going on policy-wise. When you hear the discussion saying, okay, there's gross borrowing of, 2.8 trillion, $3 trillion, United States will reach over, and here's the Social Security Trust Fund, and we'll reach in and borrow its money. And then we pay it interest. The Social Security Trust Fund holds treasury bills, a special type of treasury bill, just like, you being a rich guy, you might go buy a, 10-year bond and put it in your vault. And then there's what has to be publicly auctioned. And that's one of the things we may talk about. That's one of my stress points. And that is the retirement system of your teachers union, the bank that has to hold T-bills as part of their tier one capital, the foreign investor who thinks United States is a good investment, or they need to hold something denominated in US dollars because it's a pledge against their trade, which that part is one of the benefits of being the reserve currency. So that's how we're able to consume so much of the world's cash. Remember, the United States is the biggest borrower in the world. United States and China right now are consuming much of the world's borrowable capital. Now, what drives that borrowing? And this is what makes people really uncomfortable. Interest this year will be about 1.2 trillion. Just the interest. And that's going to continue to go up and go up and go up because of how much we have to refinance from the previous decade with artificially low rates to now starting to move back towards what normality is. And then in many ways, healthcare costs. Brian Riedel, Manhattan Institute, did a good analysis of some of the congressional budget information. But they both say the same thing. From today through the next 30 years. Now, CBO's number, Congressional Budget Office, is at the end of those 30 years from now, we have 143 trillion in borrowed money. And that 143 trillion, every dime of that borrowing, interest, Medicare, and then if in 9 years, 10 years, when the Social Security Trust Fund is empty and seniors are about to take a 22, 23, 25% cut in their check, that we reach into the general fund and make that up. And that would be also with borrowed money. So it's demographics. And that's actually why it's so hard for the political class to tell the truth. We got older as a population. I mean, we're almost on the cusp of 1 in 6 of Americans being 65 and up.
That's a lot. So the resources are going then towards that versus the future investments. But who benefits, Congressman, from all of this borrowing? At $3 trillion, that's a lot of money. And how intertwined is it into the economy?
It's actually, okay, you're actually, believe it or not, you're asking actually something people write their PhD theses on. So let's spend the next 6 hours talking about this. Now, I'm going to take you 2 different directions, but both will make sense. We've been working with and this is fairly highbrow stuff. You're not going to typically get from an idiot congressman office. Trying to understand inflation in the United States. And there's this argument out there that Fed has raised the rates. They've also been pulling liquidity out of their portfolio, trying to basically squeeze out excess cash, chasing too few goods and services. Basic definition of inflation. At the very same time, what the Democrats did in their first 2 years of the Biden administration when they controlled the government is this sort of planned economy, this industrial policy they engaged in, Inflation Reduction Act, which is Orwellian name, but even things like the CHIPS Act, these other things are substantial portions of cash from Treasury going out to industry. If you make solar panels, if you build batteries, if you agree you're going to build a new chip plant, in many ways, we in Arizona are the beneficiary of some of this, but our retirement accounts and our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids are the ones who are going to pay back the borrowing. So on one side, what Congress is doing, and then the borrowing, when we're pumping out functionally 1.2 trillion in interest payments, is so that Feds try to pull liquidity out and Congress is pumping it in. So we're at odds with each other. And that's actually, for those who used to, bathe in the monetary argument of inflation, it's just pure cash. Well, it turns out it's also congressional policy of borrow and spend, and then the cost of that borrow and spending, which is the financing of the borrowing. Who benefits? Every dime of defense, if you're going to look at my little wheel chart, every dime of defense is on borrowed money. Every dime of non-defense discretionary, the Park Service, the EPA, the State Department, all these things you think of as government is on borrowed money. And depending on where the chart is right now, $300, $400, $500 billion of Medicare is on borrowed money. So every dime for a Congress get to vote on is now on borrowed money.
It's almost unfathomable to think that way. Let's paint a scenario, if we could, Congressman, you mentioned that in about 8 or 9 years, senior poverty will double because the Social Security Trust Fund will be gone. It'll be exhausted. But let's paint a different picture. So I'm about to be 46. What if nothing? I know, right? Although it's all of a sudden, it's like, what happened? How do you get to be mid 40s? Where did life go? Nonetheless,
be my age and still have young kids, and
true.
My age, so
well, and that is the secondary part of this question. So if nothing changes, well, let's start with you. You are, a little over my age. We'll say that. So what happens to people in your age group, right? So heading towards retirement age, what happens to people like me at 46 in 20 years? And then let's talk about your kids who are both below the age of 10. Yeah. If nothing changes, what does the future look like?
I have a little boy that's 23 months and a little girl that's 8 years old. And they're biological brother and sister on the mom's side. In most fun, greatest thing, dear Lord had a sense of humor because we spent a decade trying to adopt. My little boy, when he turns 23, I think is my math now, maybe 24, to United States taxes, every single tax will have to have been doubled just to maintain baseline services. And the reason I say it that way, it's easier to fathom. For those of us who want to go into, you want to retire one day, will we have to have a whole new regime of taxes on your retirement savings to maintain these things? Will we have to have a system of much slower growth, much higher debt? Remember, healthcare was our primary driver in Medicare. The moral issue we're sort of going with is, and it's almost mathematically bulletproof now. My kids will live in a less prosperous America than I got to live in, because the borrowing today. Remember, what is a debt? It's consuming something today and letting the future income pay it back. You're peak earning years, you're still just a few years from that. And as you know, tax rates go up next year. It's already the law. So one of the great battles going into 2025 is you have almost just slight of $400 billion tax hikes. So for our average family in the Phoenix Scottsdale area, it's probably $1,800, family of four, $1,800 in additional income taxes coming. And that's already the law. How do you deal with that? And then how do you do it in a way where you can base broaden so you grow the economy, but not grow the debt? So that's about four answers all woven in together. What we're doing to our kids, to your retirement, is immoral. We know where the drivers of the debt are. It's healthcare and interest. You and I could actually do policy, not cuts, not rationing, policy to disrupt the cost and the growth of the cost of healthcare. But you got to be willing to adopt technology. You got to be willing to push forward on cures. Turns out cures are amazing economics. When you end someone's misery, and they also are able to leave the healthcare system. And right on the side of me were my joint economic economists. In the next couple of weeks, we will publish something that will either get the crap kicked out of me, or I will get people going, wow, that was bold. So you're going to get the first headline on this. We've been updating the cost of obesity in America. Uncomfortable to talk about, but it's stunning. It may be approaching $9 trillion of government spending over the 10 years. Single biggest thing you could do to reduce U.S. borrowing is help our brothers and sisters be healthier. I would argue it's moral. We actually look at I think we're going into the 5th year in a row where prime age males are dying younger. Drugs, and right above drugs, we believe it's actually healthcare issues associated with obesity. So I can define the problem, but I also can define all sorts of solutions. We did a series of presentations of how you could use technology, AI, other things, to dramatically reduce the size of the government bureaucracy. And it was fascinating, the number of lobbyists who actually sell crap to the government, who just lost their mind saying, my company doesn't want to be replaced with AI because we're a contractor to the government. And that's the battle, is there's a way I can make this math work. We also only believe we have about 3 to 5 years to make these changes, and then you're in the debt grind cycle. So that's my rambling.
So 3 years to make a change. Is the technology through AI available now? Is it a matter of training it outside of a fundamental shift in how we view and operate our government?
Yeah, it's actually a brilliant question. Remember, a lot of this isn't truly AI. It's not generative AI. It's not Skynet or whatever. Let me give you the simplest use case that actually exists right now, because we helped put this together. You call the IRS. You really want help on understanding a particular tax form. It's driving you insane. If it was a couple of years ago, you would sit on hold for a substantial portion of your life. Today, the phone picks up, and you're talking to a charming, sweet, smiley voice who happens to be ChatGPT. Not really a human. It's actually a computer, but it's willing to stay on the phone with you. It's willing to walk you through the form. It's willing to email and text you the right form. We're doing experiments with that right now in this last tax season. It also saves us a fortune. In an uncomfortable reality, but it is reality, people are really expensive in government. It's not only the salaries, it's the healthcare, it's the pensions, and the reality when you have an economy that really needs people. Government workers aren't necessarily productive in the way of growing the economy. Those same in the private economy actually have much more of a multiplier effect, but you compete with government's hiring. So what would happen if I could actually substantially reduce the number of full-time employees in government using that technology substitution? Just even my future pension costs. And that's a simple example. I mean, for several years, we've been talking about crowdsourcing environmental data. So instead of having the EPA doing some of that, you could actually crowdsource it. And that way you have a system where, hey, if someone's painting cars behind their house, you go and knock on their door, you catch it immediately. The entire air quality marketplace doesn't get penalized by the EPA because now you have almost point source information because you have people driving around using their phones.
In real time.
But the elegance of that is it would change permitting. Do you really need the whole permit regiment we use today? If someone screws up, you catch them immediately. Right now you fill out paperwork and fill up file cabinets so you know who to sue in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had a system where if someone's screwing up, you catch it immediately and you fix it right then. Air quality is healthier. Businesses have dramatically less burden. File cabinets full of paper do not make the air quality better.
Probably make it worse. Printing all that paper.
But that's you use when you have traffic, you may hit the button Waze on your phone to see alternative routes and see the crowdsourced data of where traffic is going. That sort of concept for water quality, air quality, even sound, even certain healthcare, other things exists today. And there's an army of bureaucracies and some lobbyists who battle every time I try to do these types of bills to stop it because it screws up their business model.
Why do politicians resist this? Because I get the bureaucratic fight. I get the lobbying fight because as you've explained to us here on Equal Matters and on our old show, Russell and Hunter, it's always about the money. Because if you're part of that system and money comes your way, you get that government contract. You don't want that to go away because for you, it's already money set in stone. If that goes away, you got to figure out how to make money. So why is it that your fellow members continue to resist this? Is it because they're funded by the lobbies?
Yeah, sometimes it's not about the government contract. It's the government regs create contracts. So in the talk to you about crowdsourcing air quality data. Okay, that was. I have a video on YouTube. All those things we worked out. We made a cartoon of how it works, and we got a knock on our door, and it was the organization of environmental engineers who go around to the motorcycle paint shop and this and that, and they certify their scrubbers, and then they get $1,000, and saying they love the technology, but they're going to oppose it because it puts their business out of business.
Mm-hmm.
So understand it's there's amazing things out there. You had been shocked how often we're working on something that would cure a disease, trying to move money forward, get the FDA to do something faster. And very quietly, we will get those come in and do everything they can to write a paper to say, oh, we have questions on the efficacy of this technology and this, that, to slow it down. And it's not intellectually honest. What it is they don't want the competition to their income.
Right, exactly. And because anytime there's a change, we as human beings naturally resist it. It's just kind of how we're programmed to it, especially if there's money and status involved.
Yeah, and look, our sarcastic humor is that Blockbuster Video should have hired enough lobbyists and putting Netflix out of business.
Right, exactly. Or they could have just bought it for $50 million back in the day and transformed into whatever they wanted to. With the missed opportunities there. So let's dive into these solutions here, because my optimism is starting to wane. So for 25-ish years, I've been covering American politics, and I was always optimistic about what America represents in the path forward. But in that starting to wane and understanding that we're borrowing $3 trillion in a year, and that I'm just going to pull this slide up here to see here. Debt has increased, Congressman, 89% since the beginning of the pandemic. And I always kind of thought as we're going through it, that it is, we're getting bribed with our own money. So how do we become smarter as people and understand the games that are being played here?
Oh, okay. Let's have a brutally honest moment. Stop believing crap. Stop believing folklore. When you have the member of Congress says, "I'm going to cut spending and balance the budget," there's a technical term for that. Oh yeah, they're lying to you. Brad says, "If we just tax rich people more, we'll be fine." There's a term for, oh yeah, they're lying to you. And let's walk through this, and this makes everyone unhappy. It's one of the reasons I'm one of the least popular members of Congress with their fellow members. And I love everyone. And you can actually, if you're intellectually curious, go to Manhattan Institute, Brian Riedel's. He did this paper several months ago, but he did a good job because he consolidated lots of other papers. And it said, hey, if you took people making $400,000 and up, which the Democrats talk about all the time, and you did this thing called tax maximization, you maximize their income tax to the point where the next incremental dollar becomes less. So you get your tax sort of Laffer curve. You can get them this rate, and then they're a capital gains tax and their estate tax. You just do all the taxes, and then you adjust for the economic effects. You get about 1.5% of GDP. Okay. For those of us who want to cut things, GDP is approaching about $30 trillion. So if I can get 1% of GDP, that's about $300 billion. All non-defense discretionary. So you tell me I can't touch mandatory, which means I can't touch Social Security, can't touch Medicare, can't touch Indian Health Service, or certain VA benefits, those things that are in the formula. Okay. And you can't touch defense. Then that would be reducing the size of government by about 30-40%. Now remember, much of that money in non-defense discretionary is transfers to your state, your local. We borrow it and then we send it to your community, which I think is it has an ethical problem because we're borrowing money to give it to entities that have their own taxing authority. But I can get about 1% in cuts over here in non-defense discretionary. So you got 2.5%. Great. We're borrowing almost 9% this year. So you see your math problem? The way you stabilize the borrowing is you change the cost of government. And you do it by revolutionizing the cost of healthcare, the adoption of technology to make government dramatically smaller. You also have to do other things that this is the sort of stuff that gets you unelected unless you have I'm blessed. I have a freakishly well-educated, smart district. But in the paper we're going to publish in a week or two, we're walking through the math on talent-based immigration. What the Biden administration's allowed at our border is waves and waves of very moderate to low skill individuals crossing the border. So we're crushing our own working people in America, particularly our lower skilled, poor, folks that had to, dropped out of high school or things of that. We're crushing their wage growth. It's immoral what's happening there, but there's great data that when you bring in talent-based immigration, we educate people in our universities and then send them home to compete with us, which is absurd. You actually grow wages because the higher talent skill sets actually create real economic growth multipliers. And so your domestic population actually gets wealthier when you bring in talent-based immigration. So my argument is you've got to do all these things. We have about 24 things. You got to do all of them, all at the same time. And if you did that by the end of the decade, I believe we could stabilize the debt.
So is this really then a reimagining of American government and what it is? And is that the selling point that the government from 1789 to 2024 has worked fundamentally well as far as the country goes? So we need a version 2.0 of how government is. And then I'm going to add another question to that, if you don't mind, Congressman, as far as if those government workers are no longer in the government, what would the transition to get them into the private sector look like so that they can start producing for the economy and bringing the level of standard of living up for everybody?
A resume. I mean, look, yeah, that's that's typical Democrat talking point is, well, these are jobs. They are jobs. They're really expensive jobs to the taxpayers. And the fact of the matter is, there's a reason major law firms all over the country no longer have legal assistants. They are using legal GPT. The other thing, it's really important. We need to talk about this, and it's uncomfortable. Primary driver of U.S. debt is our demographics. We got old. Our birth rates have collapsed. In 15 years, the United States has more deaths than births.
Wow.
And members of Congress don't like to talk about this because it's uncomfortable, but you got to plan for it. And that's why the adoption of the technology is so incredibly important. And you get people that are almost fearful of it, but yet, God forbid, you tried to take away their supercomputer in the palm of their hand called their phone. The world is going to fight for smart people over the next couple decades. One of the things you have to be willing to accept is synthetic biology, AI, provide us an opportunity if we move with it. But you've got to redesign your expectations of government.
Mm-hmm.
Made it to this point as just the beacon of the world. The United States is an incredible power for morality in the world, economic growth, opportunity, those things. And sometimes we forget how important we are, not only to our own citizens, but to the world. But that's because we've also been remarkably flexible. We try all sorts of things, and when they don't work, we try something else. And you got to bring back that willingness to fail and try something new. And as you become a country of sort of oligopoly sort of businesses, that creative destruction that has made us so nimble slows down that next generation of being remarkable. So from a government policy standpoint, there's my great battle is if you're an incumbent business, incumbent bureaucracy, do you really want Congress to open up the rules and allow more vitality? Not necessarily.
Yeah. And other than that, it's too hard to compel all 336 million individuals to innovate on our own or to get healthier on our own. It just doesn't seem to work as well.
I'm going to disagree with you a bit. We're human. We're Americans. Mm-hmm. We operate incentives and disincentives. So here's an example, and I get attacked on this one, but no one's been able to argue against it. It's ad hominem attacks. So in EBT cards, sort of our modern version of food stamps, is it moral to hand someone a nutrition support assistance and then say, go buy onion rings? Go buy the very things that with that nutrition support that will make you ultimately a ward of the U.S. healthcare system. And so the willingness to change how we do agricultural incentives in the United States, or nutrition support in the United States, or even incentives to get healthier in the United States. And you get people saying, it's my freedom of choice. It is. You have I'm a huge fan, but part of that freedom of choice is, do you make your neighbors then pay for your future healthcare costs, or your future this and that? And that's a transfer of, you want things, but you don't want to take the cost responsibility with it.
Well, and you have a number. I was watching some of your floor speeches, and I've watched numerous of ones over the years. And the Medicaid numbers of Medicare of what I put in versus what I'll get back is what, 5-to-1 more in benefits than I pay in.
So a point of reference for average American, the dollars you put into Social Security, you as a couple get every dime back, plus about a $72,000 spiff. It's a crap rate of return. On Medicare, for every dollar you put in, our estimates are that a retiree today will get about $5 back. That right there is the primary driver of U.S. debt.
Which makes sense.
People who will say things like, well, if you just got rid of congressional salaries, okay, we did the math, and it was like 11 seconds of borrowing in a day. Every dime of foreign aid was like 30, 35 seconds a day. I mean, every dime of foreign aid is like a week's worth of borrowing. And there's the problem, is the political class has come up with these really pithy things to say that mathematically aren't true. And then you have the bots from China, Iran, Russia that fill up our social media with stuff that's absolutely not true. And we have a lot of our population that is angry because they're poorer today. If you live in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area and you're not making 26% more today than you did the day Joe Biden became in office, you are poor. And so you have the right to be angry. And then we get this inbound information flow of things that pop up on our blogs or our text message. I mean, and much of it we don't realize is a troll farm in St. Petersburg, Russia, making crap up, trying to sow disharmony or trying to keep us actually from becoming vibrant as an economy.
There's so much in here, because are these some of the 24 things that need to be done? Because you have these outside influences. And again, going back to being human, we see things, our brain computes it. We see it enough. We think it's true, whether it's true or not. So is that part of the challenge here, Congressman, is battling what's true and what's not true?
My answer there is it's less battling that. It's more having members of the media, members of the political class know what I'm not allowed to know what stop making crap up. I mean, it's shocking. You know, I'll do these town halls or these public speaking, and some of the things you get people coming up and asking you are saying, I saw this, and going, oh God, my brain's about to explode. And you try to walk them through the math. I did a presentation on Saturday, and I was trying to explain that one of the greatest threats to our country right now is the bond markets, because we have to borrow so much money. Small movements in the bond market, if they don't think we're being credible, cost us hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. So stability in what the members of Congress say is really important. And they just stared at me saying, so you're saying if we stopped, if we did this, it wouldn't take care of everything. And there's the problem. I believe we can knock down the propagandists by having media, political class know what they're talking about and say it over and over and over and be factually accurate.
And I've always found that there are people that are interested in learning the truth. That's how I've always tried to approach my role in media, is to separate myself from everybody else, read below the headline, and really try to find the facts. As far as how well that worked, I don't know. Now, you think and remain optimistic that people at this point in time want to hear the truth, because I think many of us get that our prosperity, our country, are linked to the decisions and the spending that is done now.
And policy. The way you bend policy isn't higher taxes. It isn't, there's a whole bunch of things we need to cut because it's wasteful and actually dragging the economy, but it's policy. Policy is complex and it's hard. And some people won't get what they want, and they're going to run really nasty ads attacking you. Guess what? You signed up for the job. That's what we do.
And you got to,
I believe,
in the right direction.
Yeah, there's hope. There's a way to get us there. But that's not necessarily how you run your political campaign. And you get too many people that once they're here, they have no time to actually read and sort of learn what they're actually talking about. So they go back to what they said during their campaign. And those actually set off lots of dopamine, but are not necessarily true.
So of the 435 members of Congress, of which you are one, how many do you interact with percentage-wise that get it versus the percentage that rely on the campaign talking points and never advance their own knowledge beyond that?
I was going to give you a really sarcastic answer. There's a lot of very good people here. Even on the left, there's some folks that ideologically, it's insane what they believe, but they really do have a heart to want to try to do something. It's just the math is really uncomfortable because the math is so dystopian that it forces them to have to think about things that they don't know how to go home and tell their voters. And the voters get pissed off when you get up in front of a room and show the charts saying this is the driver of debt, because they want to believe it's not taxing enough rich people or it's foreign aid or this and that. And none of those things are true. And then you have the inbound stuff that comes in that's just fake. Mm-hmm. Look, there is hope. The only path there is to step up our game, have people act a little more intelligent, and the conservative industrial complex, which makes a lot of money on not necessarily telling us the truth. And these are my friends. That's the hard part. They need to give up some of their lobbying contracts and start caring more about saving the country. So, and with that, I have to now go into another meeting.
Well, Congressman, I appreciate the updates. I appreciate the time. Most importantly, appreciate the efforts in trying to educate us as to what the challenges are ahead. So we'd love to continue the conversation. So go save the country.
Thank you so kindly. Bye.
It is rather unfortunate that a small number of members of Congress dive deep into the issue of our spending, like Congressman David Schweikert. But what's so great about the congressman is his optimism. 24 things that we can solve. We talked about it before here on Equal Matters with Congressman Schweikert, his unified theory. He mentioned immigration and drawing more high-skilled immigrants into this country, keeping them here when they study here to work for American companies, which will, over the long term, increase our standard of living, which is the goal of all of this. America has been the most prosperous nation of all time. We'd like to continue it that way. There are some things that we can introduce, such as the congressman talked about. AI, technology that could lessen the federal government payroll, which would go a long way into maybe not balancing the budget, but at least slowing down the borrowing. But here's the reality of how we change this country. The reality is that it rests in us, because we as voters like to be lied to. We like to pick our sides. Money doesn't know a side. Money is not Republican, Democrat. Borrowing certainly is not, because if you look at the increase in spending and borrowing since 2000, it is astronomical. The United States debt has gone up 89% just since 2020 during the pandemic, but it was already way up before that. But this is that awakening that we all have to have, because we are fundamentally what drives public policy in this country. We pay attention to a media that does us a disservice. We pay attention to things online that aren't real. We think that they're real, and we think that these distractions are the biggest issue out there of the day. Meanwhile, in 3 to 5 years, the only issue that matters is this borrowing, because everything is a product of that. So this is yet another wake-up call for us to understand how much power we have if we start looking for alternative sources of information. And since you're here on Equal Matters, I would once again encourage you to share this with people. You know, you have conversations with people in your life that understand the big picture, understand the challenges that America faces. And the only way to change that, again, is to have more of these conversations, because more of these conversations creates more awareness. More awareness creates more pressure on politicians to come up with policies that will benefit you, me, your kids, and all 336 million Americans. Because at the end of this, that's the goal. I'm at what I hope is the midpoint in life, about to be 46. So I've lived a very good first 46 years. I would like the next 46 years plus to be as good, if not better. Because that way, if it is better, it's better for the generation that comes after me, after you, if it's your kids, if it's your grandkids. So that's why I encourage you to share this, because the more this is shared, the more we have these conversations, the more the politicians will listen, because politicians care about one thing: going back to D.C. come re-election time. That's the power that you have. That's the power that your friends and your neighbors have. The power to re-elect someone or try something new. And it's time now to, at the very least, listen to the truth that our spending could bankrupt and ruin this country's productivity. As the congressman explained during this episode, his son, who's just about to be 2, faces a dystopian future of which more than half of his paycheck will be confiscated just to pay taxes, which means if he makes $100,000, let's just say right off the bat, $50,000's gone. He's got $50,000 to live on. And $50,000 to live on anymore, at least in the state of Arizona, just isn't that much. And you can imagine how much less it will be 2 decades from now. That is why now is the time to act. And you act by increasing your awareness, paying attention to real problems, not distractions that are thrown your way every single way and every single day. My name is Rob Hunter, former talk show host, covering government for the past 25 years. And I've arrived at this conclusion that the only ones that are going to change this system, this America that we love, is us. Thanks for being here. If you haven't done so already, please rate and review. And if you haven't done so either, subscribe, get the episodes automatically. And if you have episode suggestions, things you want to learn more about, or other topics of conversation that might interest you, please feel free to email me, even if you just want to say hi. Easiest way, rob@equalmatters.com. Have a great night. We'll talk to you soon here on Equal Matters. Cheers.